My name is Thea Calloway, and I'm 34. The morning I collapsed on the floor of the ER, the hospital called my parents. They didn't come. I spent 11 years catching other people when they fell, and the one time my knees hit the tile, the two people listed as my emergency contact decided I could handle it alone. My sister could have driven 40 minutes. Instead, she was at the lake. But here's what none of them knew while I lay there getting a transfusion. My sister was already planning a party at a house that had my name on the deed, and what I did about that photo she posted, the one that said, "Finally, a day without the drama," changed everything about who this family thought it was. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge, where the quiet ones finally get the last word, and the truth outlasts the noise. If you've ever been the dependable one, the person who shows up for everybody and gets remembered by nobody, this story is for you. Stay with me, because the ending is one you'll want to sit with. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. It was a Monday, and I was on my second shift in a row. I'd been living on vending machine coffee and stubbornness for weeks. My stomach had been bothering me since spring, a dull, gnawing ache I kept filing under stress. I'm a nurse. I know exactly what I'm supposed to do about a pain that won't quit. I just never got around to doing it for myself. That morning, I was charting at the station when the room tilted. The letters on the screen slid sideways. My mouth went cotton dry and cold sweat came up on my neck all at once. I remember thinking, very calmly, that I should sit down. Then the floor came up to meet me. Dana caught my head before it hit the tile. She's 46, worked triage longer than I've been alive, and she didn't panic. She just started calling out numbers. My blood pressure was in my boots. When they turned me, there was blood where there shouldn't have been, dark and old, the kind that tells a nurse the bleeding has been going on a while. A slow leak, not a burst. My body had been quietly failing for weeks, and I'd been too busy holding everyone else up to notice. They got a line in me fast. Somewhere above me, a monitor started its bright, insistent scream, and for once, I was the patient it was screaming about. I spend my life catching other people. I never once planned who'd catch me. As they wheeled me back, I heard Dana say she'd pull my chart and call my emergency contacts. I closed my eyes and let them work. I thought, at least someone will come. They admitted me by noon. A bleeding gastric ulcer, they said. One I'd been walking around on until my blood count dropped too low to stand. My hemoglobin was less than half what it should have been. They typed and crossed me and started the first unit of blood, and a doctor with kind eyes told me I'd be staying at least 2 nights for monitoring and a scope. I nodded like a patient who understood, because I did. What I couldn't quite understand was the wave of childish hope that came up in me anyway. My parents were listed first on my chart. I'd put them there years ago, back when I still believed listing them meant something. Dana pulled the file at the desk and dialed my mother's number, the one I've had memorized since I was 7. I lay there and listened to the muffled ring through the open door, the way you listen for a car in the driveway when you're a kid waiting to be picked up. I told myself not to want it. I wanted it anyway. Wanting your mother to show up when you're bleeding isn't weakness. It's just the oldest reflex there is. I heard Dana's voice go soft and professional, the tone we use when we're about to deliver something delicate. Then it went quieter. Then it stopped. For about an hour after that, I let myself believe the door would open and my mother would walk through it. Coat still on, asking too many questions. I watched that door until the second bag of blood was nearly gone. The door stayed shut. Dana came back instead, and I could tell from her face that the phone call had not gone the way I'd hoped. Dana sat on the edge of my bed, which nurses only do when the news is personal. She's not one to soften things past the point of honesty, and I appreciated that even then. She told me she'd reached my mother. She'd explained I was stable but admitted that I'd needed blood, that I'd be here a couple of days. She'd asked, gently, if the family wanted to come up. And my mother, Thea Calloway, 62, who raised me on casseroles and comparisons, had asked only 2 questions. Was I conscious? Was I going to live? When Dana said yes to both, my mother had told her they were in the middle of something, that I was a nurse, that I knew hospitals better than anybody. Thea's always fine, she'd said. Thea's always fine. Then she'd wished Dana a good afternoon and hung up before Dana could get another word in. Dana repeated it to me flatly, because she thought I deserved the truth more than the comfort. I thanked her. I didn't cry in front of her, because crying felt like proving my mother right. A little while later, my phone lit up with a single text from my father, Roy. "Hope you feel better, kiddo." That was the whole thing. No call, no visit, no question about which hospital. Just a get well card he could type without leaving his chair. I set the phone face down on the blanket. I lay very still and let the words settle into me like sediment. Thea's always fine. I had spent my whole life being fine so no one would worry, and somewhere along the way, being fine had become their permission to leave me on the floor. I wondered, for the first time, what it was they were all in the middle of. The first night in a hospital bed is the longest one. The machines keep their own hours, and the hallway light finds the gap under the door no matter how you turn. I lay there with a needle in my arm and a bag of someone else's blood dripping into me, and I did the thing I do best. I stayed calm and I took inventory, the way I chart a patient at 3 in the morning. I thought about being 6 years old and scraping my knee bloody on the driveway, and how I'd cleaned it and bandaged it myself at the bathroom sink because my mother was busy with Brooke, who was crying about a lost hair ribbon in the next room. I thought about being 16 and driving myself to my own dental surgery. I thought about every casserole I'd made, every bill I'd covered, every holiday I'd hosted so nobody else would have to. I wasn't feeling sorry for myself. I was reading the chart, and the chart told a clear story. Thea handles it. Thea's fine. Thea doesn't need anything. I had built that reputation with my own 2 hands, one quiet sacrifice at a time, and now it was being used as the reason nobody had to love me out loud. I asked the monitor beside me for a second opinion. It just kept beeping. Somewhere in that long dark, I stopped waiting for the door to open. It's a strange kind of peace, letting go of a hope you've carried since childhood. Lighter and lonelier at the same time. If I was always fine, I thought, then why did every single one of them need me to be? I fell asleep before I found the answer. In the morning, I found the photo instead. I woke to sunlight and a phone full of notifications, and I made the mistake of opening the one from my sister first. Brooke had posted while I slept. It was a beautiful picture, I'll give her that. Golden hour on the water, a kayak paddle dripping light, 2 mimosas sweating on the dock railing. My family's dock. The caption underneath it read, "Finally, a day without the drama." A little leaf emoji at the end, like a sprig of peace. 41 likes. My aunt had commented, "Gorgeous." My cousin had left a string of hearts. And there, right at the top, my mother had left a single red heart, the kind she has never once left on anything I've posted. I lay there and did the math a child could do. The day I collapsed on the ER floor, the day the hospital called and they said they were in the middle of something, the something was this. They had packed the cooler and driven out to the lake house while I was getting a transfusion, and they had toasted the fact that I wasn't there. A day without the drama. I was the drama. Not the ulcer bleeding me white, not my mother hanging up on a nurse, not my sister posting cocktails from a dock. Me, lying still and quiet 2 counties over, was somehow the storm they'd finally escaped. I zoomed in on that dock without meaning to, and I recognized the railing. I'd sanded and stained it myself 2 summers ago, on my knees in the heat, because the old one was giving splinters to the kids. I stared at that photo until the nurse came in to check my line, and something in me went very cold and very clear. Not angry. Clear. The way water goes still right before the temperature drops. They discharged me Wednesday afternoon with a bag of pills and a list of things not to eat. Nobody from my family had called to ask when I was getting out. Dana had the day off, but she came in anyway, in her own clothes, and told me she'd drive me home. That's the thing about the people who actually show up. It's almost never the ones you're related to. We took the long way, and somewhere along the county road I asked her to turn down the lane that runs past the lake. I don't fully know why. Maybe I needed to see the thing everyone kept celebrating without me. Dana slowed the car and I looked at the house through the trees. It sat there the way it always had, low and brown against the water. The porch I'd painted. The roof I'd paid to have re-shingled after the ice storm. Brooke's little white SUV was parked in the gravel out front, though the party in the photo was 2 days gone. Somebody had left folding chairs out on the lawn. From the road, anybody driving by would have seen a family cabin, the kind that gets passed down through generations, warm with somebody's love. I saw 6 years of receipts. I saw a tax bill I paid every October, and a well pump I replaced in January, and an insurance premium that came out of my account, not theirs. I didn't ask Dana to stop. I looked at it the way you look at a patient you already know isn't going to make it, with a strange, tender calm. Then I told her I'd seen enough, and we drove on. She glanced at me at the stop sign and asked if I was all right. I told her I was finally starting to be. Home was a small apartment 10 minutes from the hospital, quiet and mine, with a kitchen table I'd bought with my first real paycheck. I set my discharge papers on it and opened my laptop, and the family had already filled my week for me. There was an event invitation waiting. Brooke had created it with a photo of a diamond and a border of little champagne glasses. "Engagement Sunday at the lake," it said. She and Aiden were getting married and they were announcing it at the house, and I had been added to the guest list the way you add a caterer, not a sister. No call. No, can you believe it? Just a notification. Below it, in the family group chat, my mother had already set the tone. "Family only, everyone. Let's keep it drama-free and lovely for Brooke's big day." She wrote it to a thread of 9 people, and not one of those 9 had thought to text me alone and ask how the transfusion went. I scrolled up to be sure. Nothing. Not a single private message asking whether I'd gotten home, whether I could eat, whether I needed anything at all. Just the group, planning a celebration at my house, warning each other in advance not to let me ruin it. My mother's next message came in while I watched. "We're finally having a nice weekend as a family. Don't make it about you, Thea." She hadn't asked if I was coming. She'd assumed I would. The way you assume the lights will come on when you flip the switch. That's when it stopped being grief and started being a decision. I closed the laptop. Sunday was 5 days away. I already knew what was going to happen at that house. They just didn't know it yet. To make sense of what I did next, you have to go back 6 years. To the winter, everything nearly fell apart. My father had his first heart attack that January. He survived it, but the bills didn't die when the danger passed. 3 surgeries, a long stay, a cardiac rehab that insurance fought us on every step. The debt came in like water under a door. And right in the middle of it, while my mother was still sleeping in a hospital chair, a certified letter arrived from the county. The lake house was going to tax sale. It turned out my parents had been quietly behind on the property taxes for years, letting the notices pile up in a drawer the way they let everything difficult pile up. And now the county was done waiting. The house that had held every Thanksgiving, every 4th of July, every scraped knee and first swim of my entire childhood, was about to be auctioned off on the courthouse steps to pay a debt with penalties stacked on top. My mother called me in a panic I could feel through the phone. She didn't ask how I was, or whether I could afford it, or what it would cost me. She said the thing she always said when the ground shook. "You're the sensible one, Thea. You always fix things. Do something." I was 28. I had a nurse's savings and a nurse's steady hands, and I had that reflex bred into me from the driveway up. So I said I'd look into it. I hung up and I sat with a legal pad and a pot of coffee, and I ran the numbers until the sun came up, because that is what I do. That is who they made me. And by morning, I knew exactly how much it would take to save the place none of them had managed to hold on to. The number was a little over $41,000. Back taxes, penalties, the redemption fee, and enough of my father's most urgent medical debt to stop the collection calls that were making his blood pressure spike. I had most of it in savings, Money I'd been setting aside for a house of my own someday. I took out a personal loan for the rest. I paid the county in a cashier's check I still remember the weight of. But here is where it stopped being simple. The lawyer my parents used, an old family friend named Hollis, pulled me aside after the closing. He told me plainly that my parents still had creditors circling, that if the deed stayed in their name, the same thing could happen again the moment another debt came due. The only way to actually protect the house, he said, was to put it out of reach of their creditors, to put it in the name of the person who'd saved it. My parents signed a quitclaim deed that afternoon, transferring the lake house to me, sole owner, in front of a notary, of their own free will. They were relieved. I remember my mother squeezing my hand and saying it was a load off her mind. And then she said the thing that let all of us pretend nothing had really changed. "It'll always be the family's place anyway," she said. "Names on paper don't matter between family." I believed her. That was my mistake, if I made one. Not the money, not the deed. The believing. I signed my name onto a document that made me the legal owner of my family's whole heart, and then I folded it up and put it away and let everyone keep acting like it belonged to all of us. Because it was easier. And because I loved them. Which back then still felt like the same thing as trusting them. For 6 years after that, I paid for a house I never once got to relax in. Every October the property tax bill came to my address, and every October I paid it, on time, from my account. When the roof lost shingles in the ice storm, I hired the crew, and I wrote the check. When the well pump died in the dead of January, leaving the pipes at risk, I drove out in the sleet, and met the plumber and paid him too. The homeowner's insurance renewed on my card. The dock stain, the gutter cleaning, the tree the storm took down across the driveway. Mine, mine, mine. And all 6 of those years, the family used that house like it was the air they breathed. Summer weekends, holiday dinners, my sister's friends up for a girls' trip, my parents' anniversary. Nobody ever asked who paid the taxes. I think most of them genuinely never wondered. The bill simply didn't exist for them, the way the electricity just works when you flip the switch, and you never picture the wire. I never brought it up. I told myself it was generosity, and some of it was. But some of it was just easier than the conversation. It was easier to pay than to explain. Easier to write a check than to say out loud that I was carrying something no one would help me hold. So I kept every receipt in a folder, not because I was planning anything, but because I'm the kind of person who keeps receipts. I kept them for the same reason I chart everything, because when the story gets told wrong later, and it always does, the paper is the only thing that remembers the truth. I had no idea how much I would need that folder. Not yet. I know some of you are already talking to your screen, telling me to say something, to hand them the bill and watch their faces. I hear you. But when you're the one who always holds things up, silence starts to feel safer than a fight. You know you'll be blamed for starting. If this is landing a little too close to home, tell me in the comments. Are you the dependable one too? Subscribe and stay with me, because Sunday is coming. 2 days out of the hospital, still pale and moving slow, I got pulled into the party logistics thread. Not because anyone wanted my company, because they wanted my hands. Brooke texted the group about tables and lights and a florist, and then she texted me directly for the first time all week, not to ask how I was, to assign me a job. "Can you get to the house early Saturday to set up? You're good at that stuff." I read it twice. It was the only private message my sister had sent me since before I fell down at work, and it was a work order. My mother chimed into the group a minute later, layering on the second part. "And please, no hospital talk this weekend. It's Brooke's day. Let's not make it heavy." No hospital talk. As if my 2 days bleeding in a bed were an inconvenient mood I might bring, like the wrong casserole. As if the story of me nearly running out of blood was something that might stain the tablecloth. Then, because the universe has a sense of humor, my mother added the line that has followed me my whole life. "Thea's always so good at the setup. She'll handle it. Thea will handle it." They wanted me to arrive early and arrange the chairs and hang the lights, and lay out the food, at the house I owned and paid the taxes on, so that everyone else could show up rested and celebrate a day without my drama. And the maddening part is that a week earlier I would have done it. I would have gotten there at 9 in the morning and set up beautifully and stood in the back and been fine. But I had spent a long night in a hospital learning what fine had cost me. I didn't reply to the thread. Not yet. That night I couldn't sleep, so I got up and got the box down from the top of my closet. It's a small gray fireproof box, the kind you buy when you finally have things worth protecting. I set it on my kitchen table under the one bright light, and I opened it, and I laid everything out in front of me, one document at a time, like a nurse laying out instruments before a procedure. First, the quitclaim deed. Heavy paper, the notary's raised seal you can feel with your thumb, my name typed clean on the line that says grantee. Sole owner. Not my mother's name, not the family's. Mine. Under it, the cashier's check stub for $41,000, 6 years old and soft at the folds. Then the tax receipts. One for every October, a neat stack of them, each stamped paid. The roofer's invoice, the plumber's, the insurance statements with my name and my address in the corner. I spread them across the whole table until there was no wood left showing, and I sat down in front of them and I just looked. There is a particular kind of quiet that comes from holding proof. Not anger, not vindication, just wait. For 6 years I had let words do the deciding. My mother's words, that names on paper don't matter between family. My sister's words, that I was the drama. Their silence when I bled, which is its own kind of word. And here, under a kitchen light at midnight, was the thing that doesn't get emotional and doesn't take sides. Paper doesn't get emotional. It just tells the truth, and it tells the same truth every single time you ask it. I ran my thumb over the notary's seal one more time. Every October for 6 years, I had paid to keep a roof over a family that wouldn't cross a hospital parking lot for me. I looked at the deed for a long time. Then I started to think about what it was actually for. The call came the next morning, and I want to be clear that I didn't go looking for it. It found me. My phone rang while I was making the plain toast I was allowed to eat, an unknown local number, and I almost let it go to voicemail. I'm glad I didn't. The woman's name was Gwen Ostrander, and she was a real estate agent from over in the county seat. She was polite and a little apologetic, the way people are when they're not sure they've got the right person. She said she represented a couple who'd been looking for a place on Lake Warren for the better part of a year. Retirees, cash buyers, patient people who knew exactly the kind of quiet water they wanted. They'd had their eye on one particular property for months, she said. The brown house with the good dock. On the point. She said half the folks in town assumed it belonged to a Thea Calloway, and she'd almost written to my mother. But she'd done the responsible thing first and pulled the county record to find the actual owner of title. And the name on the deed, she said, was mine. She wondered, gently, with no pressure at all, whether the owner might ever consider selling. I stood in my little kitchen with the toast going cold, and I didn't answer her right away. I told her I appreciated the call, and I'd think about it, and I took down her number. Then I hung up, and I looked at the deed, still spread on the table from the night before, and at the empty morning ahead of me, and at a text thread full of instructions for a party at my house. Gwen had called the right person. She was the first one in a long time who'd bothered to check whose name it was. I told myself I wasn't going to do anything rash. I'm not a rash person. So for a day, I did nothing but watch, and the family kept handing me reasons. Brooke sent out the formal invitations that afternoon, digital cards with gold lettering, and she'd chosen a theme. Right there under the announcement of her engagement, in a curling script, was the slogan for the whole event. A drama-free celebration. She had taken the caption from the photo she posted while I was in a hospital bed, the little dig about a day without the drama, and she had made it the banner of her party. She'd ordered napkins printed with it. My cousin texted the group a picture of them, a whole stack, cream-colored with the slogan printed in gold. So cute, somebody wrote. My mother wrote that the house always looked its best in early autumn. Our house, she said. Our beautiful lake house. And she added that she'd been thinking it was time the family had a real conversation about who gets to use it and when, now that Brooke would be starting a family of her own. Deciding who got to use my house, deciding it in a group chat. I was only kept in for chores. I read all of it, and I set the phone down very gently, because gentle was the only way I trusted myself to set it down. They had printed my sister's insult on the napkins. They were going to fold my sister's insult into little triangles and set one at every plate. On my dock. Under my roof. In a house I had bled savings to save while they toasted the peace of my absence. I picked the phone back up. I looked at Gwen Ostrander's number for a long, quiet minute. Not yet, I told myself. One more try, the honest way first. I want to be able to tell you I gave them a fair chance, so I did, and I'll let you decide if it counts. That evening, I texted my mother privately, away from the group, in the calmest words I had. I said I was glad Brooke was happy. I said that before the party, I thought we should sit down, just the two of us, and talk honestly about the lake house. Not to fight. To be clear about it, finally, after 6 years. I even softened it. I said there were some things about the house she might not fully remember, and I wanted us to be on the same page before Sunday. I watched the 3 dots appear and disappear twice. Then her reply came, and it was so perfectly her that I almost laughed. Honestly, Thea, not now. You always pick the worst possible timing. Your sister is trying to have one happy weekend and you want to have some big heavy talk. Don't be dramatic. Whatever it is, can wait. Don't be dramatic. There it was again. The word they'd hung around my neck since I was a girl, the word on the napkins, the word my mother reached for any time I asked to be treated like a whole person instead of a service. I had offered her the door. I had knocked on it as politely as I know how, and she had looked through the peephole, seen my face, and called the knock itself a disturbance. That was the moment something in me that had been holding on for 6 years finally, quietly, let go. I wasn't angry. I'd been past angry for days. I was clear, the way the lake goes clear in late fall when all the summer churn settles out of it. I put the phone down. I looked at the deed. I looked at Gwen's number written on the pad beside it. I gave them one door, I thought. They called it drama. So I stopped knocking. In the morning, I called Gwen Ostrander back. My hands were steady. I'd slept better than I had in a week, which tells you something about how right a decision can feel even when it costs you. I told her I was the owner of the house on the point, that the record was correct, and that I was ready to have a serious conversation about selling. She was professional and warm, and didn't pry into why. She just got to work. She told me her buyers were the real thing, a retired couple named the Prescotts who'd sold a business and wanted one good place to grow old beside the water. Cash, no financing to fall through, willing to take the house as is, no nickel and diming over an inspection. What they wanted most, she said, was speed and certainty. I told her what I wanted, and it wasn't the highest number in the world. I wanted a fair market price, nothing gouged, nothing given away. I wanted a clean, quiet transaction with people who'd actually love the place. And I wanted the paperwork done right. Every line, no loose ends, because I'd spent 6 years watching what happens when people leave the paperwork in a drawer. Gwen said the Prescotts would likely meet a fair price without blinking. She asked carefully whether there was anyone else who needed to sign off. Any co-owner? Any family stake? I told her the truth. No, I said. It's just my name. It's only ever been my name. Saying it out loud in daylight to a stranger who simply believed me because the county record backed it up did something to me I wasn't expecting. It steadied me the rest of the way. I wasn't doing this in a rage. A rage would have been a phone thrown across a kitchen. This was quieter and far more permanent. I'm not selling in anger, I told her. I'm selling in truth. There's a difference. She said she understood. I think she actually did. I did the next part the way I do everything, carefully and out loud with myself. I didn't want to look back later and find a single thing I'd done in heat instead of in thought. I hired my own attorney, a no-nonsense woman named Ruth, who reviewed the deed and confirmed what I already knew. The title was clean. No liens, no co-owners, no clouds. I had the full and sole right to sell, and nobody's signature but mine was required. Gwen arranged an appraisal so the price would be fair and defensible, a real number a real market agreed on, not something I pulled out of spite. The Prescotts came back willing to meet it. And then I did the thing that I think matters most, the thing that lets me sleep. I sat down with 6 years of records and I calculated, to the dollar, what my parents had actually contributed to that house since the day I saved it. The answer was almost nothing. A tank of heating oil one winter, a case of light bulbs. Under $200 all told, against the $41,000 and the years of taxes I'd carried. But it wasn't zero, so it wasn't going to be zero. I set that amount aside, plus their original down payment from decades back. In a separate figure I'd hand them clean. Because I could be furious and fair at the same time, and I decided I would be both, out loud, where it counted. I wasn't going to become the person they'd always accused me of being. I wasn't going to take a thing that wasn't mine. I was only going to stop pretending that what was mine belonged to them. Ruth drew up the paperwork. Gwen scheduled the signing for Friday. Sunday, the family would gather at the lake to celebrate a drama-free day. They had no idea what Friday was going to make of it. All that week, while I was quietly closing the book on the house, my family was busy decorating it. It would be funny if it weren't so telling. My mother called me twice, and both times it was to manage me. The first call she told me to be at the house by 9 on Saturday to wipe down the deck and set up the tables, because the caterer needed a clear space, and, of course, Thea's always fine, she'll get it done. She said it like a compliment. The second call, she told me to wear something that wouldn't clash with the photos, because Brooke had picked a color palette and I had a way of standing out wrong in pictures. I stood in my kitchen and listened to my mother dress code me for a party at a house she didn't own, and I said, "All right, Mom." Because there was nothing left to argue about. Arguing is what you do when you still think you can change someone's mind. I was long past that. At one point, she sighed into the phone and said the thing families like mine always say to the person they lean on. "This is what family does, Thea. We show up for each other." I held the phone away from my face for a second so she wouldn't hear me breathe out. We show up for each other. I thought about a hospital door that never opened. I thought about a mimosa on a dock and a red heart on a photo. Do we? I thought. Do we show up? I didn't say it. I just said I'd be there Saturday, which was true, and I let her hang up believing she'd handled me the way she always had. She was decorating the deck of a house that was already, in every way that a piece of paper can make real, on its way out of her life. Friday, I sat down at a conference table with Gwen and Ruth and signed the purchase and sale agreement for the house on the point. I want to be careful here, because I'm a stickler for the truth, and I won't dress it up. Signing that Friday didn't hand the Prescotts the keys that afternoon. What it did was make the sale real and binding. Earnest money went into escrow. The price was set, the terms were set, my signature was on every page where it belonged. The closing was scheduled for 30 days out, the ordinary way these things go. But the decision was no longer a decision. It was a contract. The house was, for all purposes that mattered, sold. I signed my name on line after line, the same name that had been on the deed for 6 years, and my hand didn't shake once. When it was done, Gwen shook my hand and said the Prescotts were over the moon, that they'd already talked about keeping the maple I'd planted by the porch. I asked her to keep the whole thing quiet until Sunday. I wanted to be the one to tell my family, to their faces, on my own terms, not have them hear it as gossip from someone in town. She agreed. That evening, before it belonged to anyone else, I drove out to the lake alone. The sun was going down orange over the water and the folding chairs were still on the lawn from a party I hadn't been invited to as a guest. I walked out onto the dock, onto the railing I'd sanded on my knees, and I stood there for a while in the cooling air. I wasn't sad exactly. You can love a place and still know it was never loving you back the way you deserved. I signed my name where it already belonged, I thought. Then I let it go. And I drove home lighter than I'd been in years. I showed up Saturday morning at 9, exactly as instructed, and I set up the party. I know how that sounds. But I wasn't there to obey anymore. I was there because I wanted to see the house one last time while it was still full of my family's voices, and because whatever I was going to say on Sunday, I was going to say it having done my part honestly, with nothing to be ashamed of. So I wiped down the deck I'd built up over the years, and I set out the tables, and I strung the lights along the porch rail, and I laid the cream napkins with their gold letters at every place. A drama-free celebration, folded neat. Brooke breezed in and out giving orders, never once asking how I was feeling 6 days after a transfusion. My mother arrived at 11 and did a slow inspection, adjusting a centerpiece I'd already centered, and reminded me again, quietly, no hospital talk. Only one person that whole morning looked at me like a human being. My great-aunt Peg, 70 years old and sharp as a tack, came out onto the deck with a cup of coffee for me I hadn't asked for. She looked at my face for a long moment, the way older women do when they've buried a husband and outlived their own share of nonsense, and she said low, so no one else could hear. "You look pale, honey. You feeling all right?" I told her I'd been better. She patted my arm and said something I've kept ever since. "Nobody asked how you're doing, did they?" It wasn't a question. She'd been watching this family longer than I'd been alive, and she'd already done the math. I told her thank you, and I meant it more than she knew. Tomorrow, I thought, she'll understand why. Sunday came up warm and gold, one of those perfect early autumn days that make a lake look like a postcard. By noon, the cars were lined all down the gravel lane, and the house I owned filled up with about 25 people, family and Brooke's friends, and a couple of the lake neighbors. The tables I'd set glowed under the strung lights. Somebody had blown up the photo from the dock, the mimosa one, the drama one, and propped it on an easel by the food like a shrine to my absence. The napkins sat folded at every plate. My mother moved through it all like the lady of the manor, accepting compliments on the house as though she'd built it with her own hands, telling one neighbor how the family had held on to this place through thick and thin. Through thick and thin. I stood off to the side in the color I'd been assigned, holding a glass of water because I still couldn't drink, and I felt strangely calm. I had a thin envelope in my bag. Inside it was a copy of the deed and a copy of the signed agreement. Not because I planned to wave papers around like a courtroom, but because I've learned that people will argue with a person and go quiet in front of a document. I didn't want a scene. I've never wanted a scene in my life. What I wanted was for the truth to finally stand up in the same room as everyone who'd spent 6 years talking over it. Brooke clinked her ring against a glass and called for everyone's attention. My mother took the little clearing by the easel, right beside the blown-up photo of the day they toasted my absence, and raised her champagne to make a toast. And I set my water down. My mother is good at a toast. I'll grant her that too. She stood there glowing in the afternoon light and thanked everyone for coming, and she talked about Brooke and Aiden, about young love and new beginnings, and the crowd made the warm sounds crowds make. Then, because she cannot help herself, she reached for the knife under the honey. "You know," she said, swirling her glass, "some people in this life bring peace wherever they go, and some people bring a storm." A few uneasy chuckles. She didn't look at me. She didn't have to. Everyone knew. "Brooke has always been my sunshine," she went on. "She brings this family joy, not drama. And on a beautiful day like this, at our beautiful family home, I think we all know how rare and precious that is." She actually gestured at the house when she said it. Our beautiful family home. Then she pivoted to the part she'd clearly been rehearsing, the part about the future. She said that now that Brooke was starting a family, it was time to think seriously about the lake house, about traditions and inheritance, about making sure this place stays in the right hands for the next generation. She said she'd been thinking Brooke and Aiden should have first claim on it for their summers, since they'd have the little ones. She was standing in my house, in front of 25 people, calmly handing my house to my sister like a dish she was passing down the table, and then she lifted her glass higher and delivered the toast she'd built the whole day around. "To family," she said, "and to keeping this place drama-free forever." The glasses started to rise. That was when I stood up out of my chair and the room began, one face at a time, to notice me. I didn't raise my voice. That's the part everyone remembers afterward, that I never once raised my voice. I stood up, and I stayed exactly where I was, and I said, "Before everyone drinks to that, I'd like to say something." My mother's smile tightened at the edges. I could see her already bracing for the scene, the dramatic outburst she'd predicted, the story she could tell later about how Thea ruined the party. She thought she knew what was coming. She thought I was going to cry, or accuse, or make a spectacle she could dismiss with a sigh and a knowing look at the neighbors. I did none of that. I kept my hands loose at my sides and my voice low and even, the voice I use with a frightened patient at 3 in the morning, the one that makes a whole room lean in without knowing why. "Thank you all for coming out to the lake house today," I said. "It really is a beautiful place. It's meant a lot to this family for a long time." I let that sit. "And since we're all here talking about it, about who should have it and who belongs to it, there's one question this family never actually got around to asking in 6 years, so I'm going to answer it for you." The clinking had stopped. Somewhere down the lawn, a kayak paddle knocked hollow against the dock, and it was the only sound. My mother laughed, a small, brittle laugh, and said, "Thea, honey, is this really the time?" "I won't be long," I said. "I'm not the dramatic one, remember?" 6 years ago, I said, to the whole quiet yard, this house was 3 weeks away from being sold on the courthouse steps. The county was auctioning it for back taxes nobody in this family had paid. Some of you knew that. Most of you didn't. I saw a few of the older relatives go still, the ones who remembered that hard winter. Dad was recovering from his heart attack. The bills were drowning them. And the house that every single one of you thinks of as home was about to belong to a stranger. I kept my voice as level as a spirit line. So I paid it. $41,000 out of my savings and a loan I'm honestly still finishing. Back taxes, penalties, the fee to redeem it, and enough of Dad's medical debt to stop the collectors. I was 28. My mother's face had gone the color of the tablecloth. Brooke's mouth was open. "And because Mom and Dad still had creditors who could have taken it right back," I said. "The lawyer had them sign the house over to me, legally, in front of a notary, to protect it." I reached into my bag then, and I didn't wave the papers. I just set them down flat on the table beside the blown-up photo and the gold napkins, where the light caught them. "This is the deed," I said. "It's had one name on it for 6 years. Mine. And every October since, when the tax bill came, it came to me. And I paid it. Every year. While all of you spent your summers here and never once wondered who was keeping the lights on." The yard had gone dead silent. 25 people holding 25 glasses that nobody was drinking from anymore. I let the deed sit there on the table and I said the last part plainly, the way you tell a family the news they're not ready for. Last week, I collapsed at work. I bled internally until I passed out on the floor. The hospital called this house's favorite people, my parents, and they said they were busy, and that I'm always fine, and they came here instead. And my sister posted a photo from that doc and called it a day without the drama. Brooke made a small sound. I didn't stop. So this week, I made one call. I accepted an offer on the house. It's sold. There's a signed agreement, it's in escrow, and it closes in 30 days. The new owners are lovely. They're going to keep the maple I planted. For one full second, nobody moved. And then my mother detonated. She slammed her glass down so hard the champagne jumped, and it wasn't a lady's voice anymore. It was something raw and shrieking. "You can't do that. This is our home. This is our family's house. You have no right." "It has my name on it, Mom," I said quietly. It always did. "After everything we did for you," she cried, Tears coming now. The fast-performing kind. You, ungrateful, spiteful girl, how could you do this to your own sister on her day? You're ruining my engagement, Brooke wailed and burst into tears herself, and my father stood up from his chair with his face gone white and said absolutely nothing at all. You're being dramatic, my mother spat through her tears, reaching for the only weapon she'd ever needed. You're being dramatic, as you always are. And I looked straight at her, and my voice didn't climb a single inch, and the whole yard heard me. For 6 years, I said, not one of you ever asked whose name was on the deed. You just used the house, and you called me cold, and you called me dramatic every time I asked to be treated like I mattered. That wasn't drama, Mom. That was me. Paying. Nobody breathed. You said I was always fine, I went on, still quiet, still even. And you were right. I was fine. I was always fine. I just wasn't yours to use. I picked the signed agreement back up and held it, not like a threat, just like a fact. I'm not taking anything that isn't mine. I did the math on every dollar you and Dad actually put into this house in the last 6 years, and I'm sending you a check for it, plus your original down payment from way back. Every cent. You'll have it this week. I'm not you. I don't keep what doesn't belong to me. I looked around at the frozen faces, at the easel, at the photo of the day they'd chosen a dock over a hospital. You wanted a day without the drama, I said, and I looked at my sister, still crying into her ring. So I'm giving you a lifetime of quiet. For a moment, the only sound was my sister crying and the water lapping at a dock that wasn't ours anymore. And then, slowly, the room turned, the way a room does when a lie that everyone half suspected finally cracks open in the light. My great-aunt Peg set down her glass. She was 70 years old and she'd watched this family her whole life, and she stood up in front of everyone and said, in a voice like a closing door, "She saved this house while the rest of you vacationed in it." A few of the older cousins nodded. One of the lake neighbors quietly set his champagne down untouched. My mother spun around looking for an ally and found a yard full of people who had just done the arithmetic. Her performance had nowhere left to land. And my father, my quiet, peacekeeping father, who had sent a get-well text from his recliner while I bled, reached down and picked up the deed off the table with a hand that shook. He held it close and read it. Really read it. His own signature down at the bottom from 6 years ago. My name up top. His face crumpled. "It really is her name," he said, barely above a whisper. "To no one and to everyone." For half a heartbeat I thought he might finally stand up for me, but he only lowered himself back into his chair, the deed still in his hand, and looked at the ground. He didn't defend me. He never once did. My mother tried, at the very end, to change the shape of it. Her voice slid all at once from fury back into honey, the fastest switch I've ever seen, and she reached a hand toward me across the table. "Thea, sweetheart, let's talk about this. We can work something out. You don't have to." But it was 6 years and 1 hospital bed too late, and we both knew it. I gathered my papers into their envelope, unhurried, and I slid them back into my bag. Then I did one last thing. I reached over and I straightened the little gold napkin at the nearest place setting, the one that said, "A drama-free celebration," squaring it up neat the way I'd laid all 25 of them the morning before. "Enjoy the party," I said. "It's the last one here." I didn't shout it and I didn't cry it. I turned and I walked back through the house I had saved, past the kitchen where I'd hosted a dozen Thanksgivings, out the front door I'd painted, down the porch steps I'd rebuilt after the ice storm. Nobody followed me. I got into my car in the gravel lane full of everyone's vehicles, and I shut the door, and only then, alone, did I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for 6 years. Who's dramatic now? I thought. I didn't need to ask out loud. The napkins had already answered. The sale closed 30 days later, quiet and clean, the way I'd wanted it. The Prescotts turned out to be exactly the people Gwen promised, and they sent me a card that fall with a photo of the maple I'd planted, gone red at the edges, still standing by the porch. I mailed my parents a check for every dollar they'd genuinely put into that house, down payment and all, with a short note that was polite and final. I told them I'd always be family, but I would no longer be furniture. I said I'd come to holidays when I was invited as a daughter and not assigned as help, and not before. My mother left me 11 voicemails over the next 2 weeks. I listened to the first 3. They swung from tearful apologies straight into blame and back again, sometimes in the same breath, and I stopped listening after that, because I'd finally learned the difference between an apology and a performance. Brooke got married the following spring, somewhere else, and didn't invite me, which honestly felt less like a punishment and more like being let off a hook. My father never called, but Aunt Peg did. She called and asked me to Sunday dinner at her little house in town, just the 2 of us and her old dog. And I went. And I sat at a table I hadn't set, and ate a meal I hadn't cooked, and was asked how I was feeling and actually meant to answer. It was the first time in longer than I could remember that I'd been at a family table as a guest instead of the staff. I helped her with the dishes after, because I wanted to, which turns out to be a completely different thing. I learned that being the strong one was never the problem. The problem was letting people mistake my silence for permission, and the day I finally put my name out loud where it had always quietly been, I stopped bleeding for people who wouldn't cross a hospital parking lot for me. That's my story. One collapse, one photo, one phone call. If you've ever been the dependable one that everybody forgets to thank, take this as your sign. Your kindness was never a debt you owe forever, and a boundary is not the same thing as drama. Go check whose name is really on the things you've been carrying, and if this story reached you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.